We start with Freud. After having cleared the general ground of psychoanalysis, introduced a few words and the language of psychoanalysis, we go into Freud first by having a overview of Freud, and then we go into his specific work, starting with studies on hysteria, preliminary communication. So today let us have an overview of Freud in prospect and retrospect. Sigmund Freud, Dr. Sigmund Freud, he is the founder of psychoanalysis. All the principles and the core technique of healing, the way we do therapy, originally was conceived by him. He was trained as a neurologist, a doctor, worked with Brewer and Charcot and a few others, and he started working with hysteria, which was a very common sickness in those times. And what he found was something very unique, that if he talked to the patients, they got some form of relief. If he talked about the childhood, it was even bringing more relief. When patients were able to feel their feelings in the session, it brought even more relief. What was even more surprising was that they were using hypnosis at that time. So they would put people into a hypnotic trance, and certain memories which were not available to the conscious mind would become available in that particular state. As though the mind was divided into two parts, and one part, which was conscious, could not access the part which came up in hypnosis. As though that part of the mind was available only in the hypnotic state, not in the waking conscious state. So this gave rise to two fundamental insights. The first was that there is a part of the mind which is outside of our awareness and control, which opens up only in the hypnotic state. And there, memories which we in the conscious state believe are forgotten are still there alive. Number one. Number two, that this state of mind which opens up only in hypnosis, is not like a dead storage chamber. It is not just the storage, but rather that this part of the mind is very creative and has autonomy of its own, which was very surprising. That there is a part of the mind outside of our awareness and control, which is not only storing memory, but is very creative and has autonomy of its own. It is not under the control of the conscious mind. And desires are operating there, fears are operating there exactly as they operate in the conscious mind. So all the desires, be it sexuality, aggression, greed, envy, love, happiness, all the desires are working through the subconscious mind also. Meaning, the desires are so strong, they don't confine themselves that they should get their satisfaction only through the conscious mind. They also get their satisfaction through the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind is an extremely creative area of the mind with autonomy and power of its own. It has autonomy, it has creativity, it has purpose, and it has power. First insight. The second insight was talking and feeling emotions somehow results in healing. Till then, the idea was that the whole problem is biochemical and only biochemicals can deal with biochemicals. How talking and feeling can affect biochemicals was not accepted at all. It's a one-way street. From biochemicals, the psychic states arise. That's it. You can't do anything from the psychic state to change the biochemicals. The reverse traffic was not possible. And therefore, the whole idea of therapy was out of the question. That if it's a one-way street, that biochemicals are leading to a psychic state, and you cannot do anything in the reverse order, then you cannot do anything from outside except the prescription of medication. So this had two consequences. One, on the model of the mind, that the model of the mind changed from conscious model of the mind to one which had two parts, the conscious and the unconscious. And the unconscious was much larger, far more creative, far more autonomous, and far more powerful. And there came up that whole simile of the uh, tip of the iceberg, that the tip of the iceberg only is visible above the water, and a vast mountain is below the surface of the water. And the second was that you can have a traffic in the reverse direction, that by talking and feeling, you can make changes in the biochemical templates which are operating the brain. And that is how therapy becomes possible. If the reverse traffic was not possible, there would be no question of therapy. So these two insights were fundamental. What Freud found was he started with hypnosis, but he had two difficulties with hypnosis. First, everyone could not be hypnotized. Right? And this is a personal experience. I went into hypnosis as a patient and I could not go into trance. And the reason is the anxiety is very high. You are not ready to trust the therapist and the complete process of how it would go and what it would uncover inside of you. So we have these two contradictory desires. There is a there is a terrible need to be understood, and there is a terror of being known. And we all fight between these two contradictory desires. That there is a terrible need to be understood, and there is a terror of being known. Intense shame comes up. Intense envy comes up. Intense sadness and anxiety comes up. So everyone could not be put into a trance, first difficulty. Second difficulty, what was suggested or what was gained in that session often got reversed and the symptoms reappeared. So the changes were not permanent. And these two facts led Freud to give up the method of hypnosis and use the method of free association. That you talk to the person in the waking state, you don't hypnotize him. Now, the unconscious mind that Freud talks about is not actually a Freud's discovery. Much before Freud, people talked about it in different ways. First was Mesmer, who used hypnosis and many other forms of healing, which I sent the video for you for reference. The journey from Mesmer to Freud on the concept of the unconscious. That Mesmer first talked about it, even practiced a form of healing using this concept. Then we had the philosopher Schopenhauer. He used to say, men feel they are drawn from in front, but in fact they are pushed from behind. So we feel the situation in front of us is causing us to act. The object in front of us is activating the desire inside, and then the object becomes object of desire. But in fact, even before the object appeared before us, the desire was still active. In fact, the desire powered us or forced us to find an object. Right? So Schopenhauer used to say that we feel we are drawn from in front, but in fact we are pushed from behind, which means the unconscious mind is pushing us into desires, fears, and actions. Now, on this point, there is a slight difference between Schopenhauer and Lacan. Right? So, the idea here is Schopenhauer's idea that there is desire in search of object of desire. And in Lacan, there is a concept of the object appearing in front of us and activating our desire. And obviously, both of them are true. I feel hungry and I start searching for food. Something tasty and favorite of mine is put before me, and even if I am not hungry, the hunger is aroused. So there is object that precipitates desire, and there's a desire which is in search of the object. Both movements actually happen. Freud used to call this the talking cure. This was actually a word used by one of his patients, and even today, psychoanalysis and all psychotherapy forms of Western psychotherapy essentially still are called the talking cure. Freud was a materialist and neurologist all his life. So, towards the end, his last ambition was what is called the project. And what the project means is he wanted to find a biological basis for psychoanalysis. That all that we talk, what is the biological and neurological basis of psychoanalysis? He died unfinished related to this project. This project never got finished in his lifetime. And today, some people who work in the specialized area of neuropsychoanalysis, they are trying to do the same thing. That what we talk of in, yeah, please. You're muted.
The Nietzsche, the after Mesmer, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche about unconscious mind.
Huh. Nietzsche talked about the unconscious mind. He said, what is the primary desire in man? What is the strongest desire? And he said, it is the will to power, the will to overpower, the will to absolute power. That was his statement. The will to power, a will to overpower, a will to an absolute power. So for him, for Freud, sexuality was a very strong motive. For Nietzsche, power was one of the strongest motives. And his idea was that this search for power is not really conscious. It is seated in the unconscious. So much before Freud, Nietzsche anticipated the power of some part of the mind not accessible to us governing our feelings and behavior. So if you look at parallel in psychoanalysis, it would be Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler is also based his theory on power. What he calls the central problem as the inferiority complex. So he took a lot of things from Nietzsche, but Nietzsche, in a sense, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche in philosophy both predated Freud and had the idea of unconscious without using the word so much, had the same idea. So in history of ideas, Freud did not discover or invent the word. It was there in tradition before he came in. So in philosophical terms, Freud is a materialist, does not believe in God or soul. He is not an idealist. He recognizes hedonism as governing human nature. He recognizes individualism as governing human nature. And after the Second World War, he conceptualized the death instinct, where masochism became central, aggression became central, destruction became central. And destruction went both ways, destruction of the other and self destruction. And after the Second World War, he was largely a pessimist. And in that way, Schopenhauer also was a pessimist. Nietzsche was an optimist, but Schopenhauer was a pessimist. Schopenhauer defined life as endless pain to a painful end. So he had a very different take on things, but Nietzsche was very optimistic. He wanted the race to evolve to the next stage of the superhuman. In fact, on that particular idea, he preceded Sri Aurobindo. Sorry?
Please repeat, sir.
On this particular point of we being not the last destination of evolution and a better race about to come, he preceded Sri Aurobindo, because Sri Aurobindo also talked of supramental and the superman, the Gnostic man, the advent of the supermind, so the advent of the supramental race. And Nietzsche also had that kind of an ideal of the superman. So Freud, being a pessimist, he defined the goal of therapy as making unbearable happiness bearable unhappiness. So now comes the following question, a very interesting question. Why should the unconscious exist? Two ways the question can be posed, philosophical and scientific. We will not go into the philosophical aspect because that will take us into an inquiry like why should anything exist at all? And that's a very different arena of discourse. I mean, we can ask that immune system exists and it works in a particular way. But if somebody asks, why should the immune system exist? We will say there is a will to survive. And then he says, why should there be a will to survive? Then at some point, we enter into the unknown. That we can't start science from there. That's an area of philosophy. So we will not go into the philosophical question of why does the unconscious exist? Why could reality not manifest itself in some other way? That kind of inquiry we will not go into. We will start with more a circumscribed question, that why does the unconscious exist in the given scheme of things as we find it? And within the framework of what we find, we answer as this. One, we are creatures of pleasure. So we don't want anything painful. So if something painful happens, we don't want to feel it, and therefore we relegate it to an area of the mind we don't want to access. And therefore the unconscious exists in order to store the painful things we don't want to feel. Second, the unconscious also exists to provide us pleasure. It creates pleasurable entities which we don't want to accept given our reality and morality. So creating pleasure and avoiding pain, both are reasons for existence of unconscious. We have many fantasies of pleasure in our unconscious, some of which come up in our dreams. And we then realize how many fantasies of pleasure lie there without our knowing it. And similarly, how many fears lie there without our knowing it. Third is the processing capacity limitation. That we can't process all the stimuli at once. We have to sequence it, given the processing capacity limitation. And therefore, there has to be some storage to which what is not in the processing uh, activity is put as a storage. Right? It's like an inventory of a company. That what is not in active storage is put in those cupboards. So it's a storage system. Many insignificant inputs come. Like for example, right now, the fan will be creating the wind, which will be touching my hand and generating some stimuli, which I don't want to focus upon. All those unprocessed or half processed stimuli also will go and be stored there. So not only the full blown memories, but even stimuli which is in the process of being processed, right? Which is yet to take a full form of any thought or feelings. Bion theorizes a lot on this. He talks of something called thoughts awaiting a thinker, right? So when we go into Bion, we'll touch that part, right? There are different levels of processing, there are different things. And only when some conscious will or some coordinator or some meaning generating entity enters, that that is taken care of, and the semi processed thing processes to completion and acquires some meaning. There is a natural tendency of the whole human system. Whatever is not used becomes weak. That is true for memory also, that what is not used for years naturally goes into the unconscious. The storage of the proto processed material, as I said, the question of capacity. Feelings may be generated which we cannot bear at once. We want to bear them in small packets, and we need some storage system where they can be kept away from us, so repressed that they don't produce any feelings in us. Demands of survival. We may have to focus on one thing, and in the unconscious, something else may be going on. So, different things go on in different parts of the system, but we want to focus on something given survival priorities. So, we want other things to be put into the unconscious. Search for the right situation. There may be a trauma, but we are not yet ready to heal, either because of capacity or because of somebody that we are awaiting. We have not found the safe person. We have not found the right container. We have not found the right guide and the right process or the right life experience. When that happens, the memory will come up and be taken up for healing. But till then, it has to be put somewhere, and therefore the unconscious. The last is maybe human evolution, the way nature has planned it. It has in its design that for certain period of time there will be an unconscious, and over a long period of time maybe that will reduce or it will go away. Right? Now why, nobody can answer, but is a part of the natural evolutionary process that this should exist for some centuries and therefore it exists. These are all the reasons why the unconscious exists in the first place. Any questions on this?
So can we say the civilization or the demands of the society that also necessitate something like unconscious, which will contain the drives that cannot be expressed to the obvious to the world?
Correct. Very true. Very true. In fact, Freud has a full paper on this, civilization and its discontents.
Hmm.
That on one hand, we cannot have civilization without the unconscious. Right? Repression is necessary so that the animal in us does not come out and act out in society. On the other hand, when we repress too much, it explodes. At individual level, it can create psychic difficulties. At collective level, it will create good group conflict. That when so many individuals cannot repress what is inside, then the group will come together and find an object on whom it can be released. So then they will find any reason to let loose that aggression, sadism, and brutality. And therefore, unless the unconscious of everyone is cleaned, the group cannot actually become a non-violent group. And that being a mirage, in history we find of 5,000 years, we don't even find 50 years of peace because we are a very aggressive species in that sense. So that was Freud's idea in Civilization and Discontents, that repression is a make-do solution. It is, we don't have any tool to address the generation of aggression, sadness, domination. We only have tools to somehow control it. And the control also is a very fragile control. After some years, it explodes and the controlling mechanism can no longer control. And that is where we see group conflicts and brutality on a social scale. A few words to be clarified before we go to read Freud in original. Freud used the word unconscious. Some people use the word subconscious. Sri Aurobindo uses the word subconscious, right? And his idea is that any part of the mind which has autonomy, creativity, drive to survival, drive to pleasure, you can't call it unconscious. It is just that it is subconscious. It is below the awareness. It is not inert. And the word unconscious should mean something inert. Right? But Freud did not use that word, so we'll continue with unconscious, although subconscious actually is a better word. So we'll continue with unconscious. Second word to clarify is psychodynamic. There are two words, psychoanalysis and psychodynamic, and they are used in the therapy world quite often, so we should know it. Psychodynamic approach in therapy means any approach which is based upon working with the unconscious. For example, psychoanalysis is one area which works with the unconscious, and ISTDP also is another area working on the unconscious. So both will be classified as psychodynamic approaches. So here the word psychodynamic will mean it's a large arcade under which psychoanalysis and ISTDP both are found. Now there is also a contrary use of this word, right? That some people in psychoanalysis use this word differently. They say we are either practicing pure psychoanalysis or we are practicing psychodynamic approach in psychoanalysis. Now these are very two different meanings of the same word which are used in the therapy circuit. So this means that when you do therapy primarily rooted in transference, we call it a pure psychoanalytic approach. But when you don't use transference heavily in your therapy approach, we call it psychodynamic approach. Like the Kleinian school is very heavy in using transference. For example, a patient comes for the session and he says, it's not easy to be with the boss. He's such a disgusting person. Now, a person working in psychodynamic approach may just let it go and wait for the next statement. A person working with the pure analytic, psychoanalytic approach who is waiting for transparency will bring himself in and say, do you mean to say I am a disgusting person? So the technique there is bring yourself in, take the person in transference. What he says in the context of then and there, that there it happened 2 days back. So he's talking of an event which is then and there. You convert it into here and now. So then and there gets converted into here and now. You bring yourself in and get the person in a transferential thing. Now, when to use this, when not to use this approach, when can it go correct, when can it go wrong, we'll talk about it when we do the technique lectures. That when should you get in transference, when should you not get in transference, how pure transference you want, how pure can you handle, how pure, what category of patients can take. That's a different area altogether. When you do technique, how to do therapy inside the room, then we'll go into these questions of different types of transferences, outcomes of transferences. So typical Freudian, Winnicottian, Kohutian, right, or Jungian will essentially be in psychodynamic approach. Kleinians, Bionians will more likely to be in the pure psychoanalytic approach with transference at the center. Kleinians even more than the Bionians. Another, yeah, please.
That is the same division as leftist and rightist?
Uh,
No. Okay.
Not in the ideological sense, in the sense that you will find people from left and right on both the areas. But if you draw the axis of left versus right in psychoanalysis, uh, you will find Adler more on the left,
Mhm.
Lacan slightly on the left. You will find Kohut on the right, Jung on the right. Freud is ambivalent on both the sides.
And
Hello?
Melanie
Sorry?
Klein, Melanie Klein.
Uh, Melanie Klein, uh, in theory, she was slightly left of center,
Oh,
but as a person, she actually came out as right of center.
And in case of Freud, isn't it the earlier Freud was more towards the other side?
Huh. So there is a will the next slide is about it. The early Freud and the late Freud. So the word that is important now is the infinity of desire. It's very important in psychoanalysis that the root of the mind is in desire, and the nature of desire is it's infinite, it's variety seeking and repeating. Satisfaction of a desire does not exhaust a desire. After some time, it repeats, and desire also wants variety. So the desire is infinite. Like uh, I go to a sweet shop, I'm very hungry. When I'm just outside the sweet shop, I feel as though I will eat all the sweets of the shop. That's the desire to have so much of pleasure. But the moment three pieces go in, I can't take it anymore. So there is an inbuilt conflict between my software and hardware. Right? The software is driven by infinity, and the hardware is driven by homeostasis. And homeostasis and infinity both are at conflict. So there is an inbuilt conflict in the hardware software situation. And the second inbuilt conflict in life is between desire on one hand and reality and morality on the other. So we are put into a situation where conflict is inbuilt inside our system and outside in society. And that's why it's almost impossible to find a man without unfulfilled desire. There can be no man without unfulfilled desire because everyone has limitation inside and limitation outside. And therefore, it's not possible to find a man without any frustration. So, this infinity of desire is very important, and this gives rise to the search for omnipotence. That on one hand, the desire itself is to be omnipotent. But when we find that we cannot be, we are not able to give up the desire. And therefore, we say, if I can't be, there cannot be, there must be somebody who can be. So then the search for the omnipotent starts. And this is where the classical narcissist dependent pairs they perform. This is also how we look up to celebrities because we have projected our omnipotence on them. That even if some actor comes, people are dying just to touch that actor. And if he shakes hand, he will keep telling this story for 6 months to different people, as though that man has come from some heavens dropped down. This is because of the projection of omnipotence. So that person becomes the moon you cannot touch. He gains all those surreal qualities. And this is very important in all personality disorders. The whole game of omnipotence. So there is a lecture by me on my channel. The title is The Game of Omnipotence. How we are all caught in that game in different ways. It's very difficult to get out of the game. Best is to optimize. So the whole uh, work of Freud, the world he created, the German word is Weltanschauung, which is the entire uh, world of Freud, the entire canvas that he rolled out, his world. So, about Freud, it is said it's not only a clinical theory, it's actually a kind of a worldview. And he generated an atmosphere, an opinion, and a way to look at reality. Today, in humanities and social sciences, even if they oppose Freud, they have incorporated all the basic concepts. For example, Freudian slip, for example, catharsis, for example, bottled up emotions, for example, uh, sadomasochistic, right? So, for example, narcissistic. So, many of the concepts created by Freud. Narcissism was not created by him, people before him, but he made it popular by discovering two types of it: primary narcissism and secondary narcissism. We'll come to it later. There is the full so in humanities, social sciences, Freud is very much used, right? In film analysis, literature analysis, uh, in intersectional in intersectional analysis, in interdisciplinary studies, can always use find it. There is a whole industry of repudiating Freud, starting with Jung. So Jung started this bash Freud movement, and it's very strong, even goes on even today. Jung, Aaron Beck, and there is a whole industry of repudiating Freud. You can't ignore him, either you like him or you oppose him. There are some who appreciate Freud very much, like Lacan, and he gave this slogan back to Freud, and he used to tell his followers, you may be a Lacanian, but I am a Freudian. So every 25 years, we have this back to Freud in some way or the other. That tells us there's something enduring in what he said. Not that all he said was correct, not that all he said was complete, but some what he said was true and enduring. In homeopathy, we have a similar thing, back to Hahnemann, every 25 years. Same is here in Freud. Just to make, yeah, please.
There was a film called The Dangerous Method, which depicted about the conflict between Freud and Jung. And
It's a part of our course. I'll be uh,
uh,
giving it to you to watch and analyze. Because it's not only a film, it's autobiographical. The dialogues which are used in that film are actually what happened in their conversations. Like there are some dialogues which are very famous. Don't go so far when you are so near.
I don't
Freud says
remember.
this. Freud says this to Jung when he starts conceptualizing the collective unconscious. So he tells Jung, don't go so far when you are so near. And there is a very famous dialogue that they are having a conference. Everyone leaves the room, and then Freud gets up to leave with Jung, and he has a convulsive fit of hysteria, and he falls down. And Jung goes down to lift Freud, and just as he lifts his head, Freud says slowly, how sweet it will be to die. Right? Very famous dialogues, and they actually happened. Like they are on a ship going to USA for the first big psychoanalytic conference in USA, which they postponed twice or thrice because Freud was not ready to come. Finally, they go. On the way in the steamer, both of them are in the ship. So in the morning at the breakfast, Freud asks Jung, what did you dream? So Jung gives his dream, and Freud starts giving interpretation. And then Jung tries to do the same thing, and Freud says, I cannot risk my authority. And Jung writes in his autobiography, it burned itself into my memory that this man was placing authority about truth. So those are actual things which is in the film, but autobiographical. Very, very literally true. Uh, okay, just to list out the work of Freud before we go into it. Most productive period was 1856 to 1939. First in Austria, and after Hitler invaded Austria, Freud had to go to UK to save himself and his family because Jews were being killed, so he left for there. 1887 starts using the hypnotic suggestion. 1890 starts using the free analysis, free association cathartic method. 95 publishes first book, Studies on Hysteria. 1896 first coins the term psychoanalysis. 97 he undergoes something very important, his own crisis. So for 7 years he was in a neurotic situation himself, the crisis, and many principles of psychoanalysis he discovered in his own analysis of himself. So he calls that 7 years the splendid isolation. And a similar period was undergone by Jung. He called it Nekia. That period where one is intensely drawn into one's own inner crisis. One believes nobody can understand him. One does not talk much to people. And he keeps analyzing himself in some terms or the other. And he finally comes out healed to some degree. And then you feel more complete, more whole, and you feel you have a mission for the world, or mission for your life, or some meaning of your life. So that kind of crisis you undergo, Freud called the splendid isolation, Jung called the nakia. 1900, he did the interpretation of dreams. 1905, three essays on sexuality and jokes and the relation to the unconscious. 1908, the first international congress happened of psychoanalysis. 14, he published his famous paper on narcissism. 15, introductory lectures of psychoanalysis. And this goes on. He delivers the lectures, then publishes the lectures. 20, beyond the pleasure principle. That is where the turn happens of later Freud, where masochism, death instinct, destruction, all those elements come in. Man is no longer seen as a pleasure maximizing organism, creature, but also somebody who is led by aggression and destruction. 21, he publishes group psychology. 23, the ego and the id. We'll be doing these papers one by one. 26, inhibition, symptoms and anxiety. 27, future of an illusion. Because he was against religion, he used to call it the general neurosis of the species. So he was very materialist in that sense. Very different from Jung. Early and late. We have two kinds of great thinkers. One who produce some great work and keep going in that direction till the end of their lives. They are single direction thinkers. You can think of Hegel, you can think of Kant, you can think of Klein, you can think of Davanloo. They did some original work, great work, and then kept developing or kept going in that direction. There is another set of thinkers who do some very great work in their youth, and later on they do something very different. And in such thinkers, you have very different output in terms of the early person and the late person. Now, this is true about Heidegger, Wittgenstein, Lacan, Bion, and Freud. In all these cases, you have the early Heidegger and the late Heidegger very different. because they revised their ideas, their opinions, and revision was radical. Wittgenstein, early and late, 180-degree difference. Lacan, same way. Bion, same way. And Freud, the same way. Early Freud was focused on survival, pleasure, sexuality, creativity, life instinct, and eros, the young Freud. And he was more interested in exploring, taking psychoanalysis to various areas. Right? So he would take it to mythology, history, and anthropology, and so on. He did psychopathology of everyday life. Right? And the late Freud is focused on aggression, masochism, destruction, inertia, death instinct, what he called thanatos. So life instinct he used to call eros, and the death instinct thanatos. And the old Freud had two uh, two precipitators really, which produced the term, and both were related in a way to the Second World War. The first was patients coming with World War experience were repeating the same painful memories over and over again. Initially, he thought this was a way to master it, that every time you repeat, you gain some mastery. But then he thought that actually they were relishing that repetition. And that gave the idea of masochism, that you can relish pain. And then the whole analysis of the Second World War as a phenomena, and that led him to the roots of aggression, masochism, death instinct, very powerful in human beings. And then he wrote the famous paper, Civilization and its Discontents. So the first paper was Beyond the Pleasure Principle. The late Freud, the Beyond the Pleasure Principle goes into the masochism and the entire death instinct and so on. And then we have Civilization and its Discontents. Where did he travel? He took psychoanalysis to art, trying to interpret Leonardo da Vinci, everyday life, slips, jokes, totem and taboo in anthropology. So, in some of the tribal customs, when something dies, including the relatives, they eat a part of that body. And he came to realize that eating a part of someone's body is a way to make that person our own. And it's a sophisticated way of denying the loss. He also took it to religion, and he published papers like Moses and Monotheism, Future of an Illusion, and Civilization Its Discontents. So his canvas was wide, not only psychoanalysis, but took psychoanalysis to mythology, anthropology, some form of history. So his own problems and his not being able to heal himself completely. He had a falling out with all of his associates, and an intense falling out. First, he fell out with Jung, Adler, Ferenczi, and he used to say that his analysis of himself was that he was finding the most loved friend and the hated enemy in the same person. And others used to say that he was very narcissistic, autocratic, despotic, and intolerant of any deviation. So he had his hysterical fits, he had his addiction, because of which he had repeated surgeries of the mouth. And when that became very painful, he asked one of his friends, the doctor friend of his medical college, to repeatedly give him morphine, and that's how he died. In a way, it was a kind of suicide and assisted dying. And he once fell down and he said this to Jung, how sweet it will be to die. So there is one video I have kept on my channel with the same title, how sweet it will be to die. Um, one wit wrote a letter to him saying people say you are narcissistic, autocratic, and masochistic. What is your opinion as a leading psychologist on this um, accusation of the people? And Freud said, when it comes to myself, I don't trust my opinion. How do we look at the retrospect and the prospect? In retrospect, created a fundamental area of knowledge. Fundamentals he discovered are eternal, they are still true today. It's very easy to stand on somebody's shoulder and criticize him and be wise. When you are discovering something in a chaotic, unknown situation, it's very different. And we will see that when we read him in original, how he was struggling for explanations. With regard to man and his mind, absolute genius and absolutely honest, open to revising himself even in old age, which he did. The reach is very wide. He is used in film studies, literature, anthropology, lot of things. Limitations are many. His model of the mind is not comprehensive, needs lot of development. His idea of pathology and pathogenesis needs a change. Right? And we'll see that when we look at hysteria. His technique also has undergone a lot of change. People have improved upon it. And there are some limitations of the technique. And more esoteric concepts from the East, he never gave value or tried to understand or incorporate in, which now is slowly going to happen. What is the prospect after retrospect? Back to Freud happens every 25 years. Fundamentals are forever. Death instinct needs more research. It's not a very clear, uncontested concept. Some people say aggression is good enough, you don't have to invent death instinct, which is so esoteric. Model of the mind, whoever develops a comprehensive model, and I have tried to do it, there is no doubt that we will have to incorporate a lot from Freud. The core of pathology, as we try to understand, and the core of healing, some ideas of Freud always will be there. In terms of technique, the basics of the technique always will be there. And in holistic healing framework, whatever we create, some component of Freud, as he outlined it, will still be there. But these are all developing areas where people have gone far beyond Freud. So today's model of the mind is very different, very comprehensive, far more developed than Freud's idea. Today's understanding of pathology is far developed, far advanced. Healing techniques are far advanced, far more holistic than Freud would think about it. So we have gone far beyond Freud, but the fundamentals still stay. And many of the things which he discovered and were not given importance, over time we are finding that something valuable we have missed out. So there's always a back to Freud uh, every 25 years that we see. So this is what he said. Even 100 years from now, people will have savage and inchoate rage to psychoanalysis, which is even today true. That the critics often don't even know how rage in their unconscious for their own defensive purposes is coloring their so-called objective opinion about psychoanalysis. And he said the goal of therapy is to make unbearable unhappiness bearable unhappiness. So I think it's enough for the day. And next time we shall continue with the original of Freud, preliminary communication. Any questions to anybody? Please come out. Feel free with the questions. Feel free to have coffee, tea, or food if you want to. I have no problem with that. Hedonism is encouraged.
After a frustrating session, the analysand is allowed the luxury of an ice cream or coffee.
I used to do it. From the ISTDP session straight to the chai ka galla. You can't endure it. In fact, one of my teachers, I asked him, he was in therapy with two different people. 3 years with the first and 2 years with the second. So I asked him, why did you go for therapy to the second? He said that was to overcome the first. So once you're out of the session, I think you definitely go for a cup of tea. And you sit there, you don't do anything, you allow things inside you to work out. So after the session, it's always good to do nothing for half an hour.
In that case, we need to dig into the understanding of the pleasure of unconscious.
Right.
Let's see.
If there are no questions, should we stop for the day?
Sir.
See you then next Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Thank you.